After being shipped across the country, this gaming PC just won't turn on. Like, despite the power supply being plugged in and on, the power button just doesn't work. So what's going on here? Well, my first thought was that something probably popped loose. That's how most of these systems where they won't turn on, it's because like the 24 pin comes loose, maybe the 8 pin, or even the front panel headers, but all of those are connected. And if you're thinking maybe it's the power button, well, when I tried bypassing it, did absolutely nothing. And because the system worked previously, I doubt it's the power supply, but we can verify that with our Dr. Power 3 power supply tester, where we'll see it turns on just fine. So what gives? Well, I honestly wasn't too sure until I noticed how loose this GPU was, which likely doesn't matter to the system turning on, as it's not really essential, but what is the CPU cooler, which has a ton of flex. Like, I think it came loose during shipping. And if you're wondering why that matters, well, this is an AM4 motherboard, which uses something called a PGA socket, which stands for pin grid array, which means the pins that communicate between the CPU and motherboard on the CPU itself, rather than the motherboard like LGA, which stands for LAN grid array. And the common problem with PGA sockets in transport is that because they don't have an outer retention mechanism like LGA, the force of a loose cooler like this and some bad thermal paste sometimes causes the CPU to get cemented to the cooler rather than staying in the socket, and thanks to the wobbly force of not having a secure fit, well, it comes loose. And a little pro tip, if you ever have a PGA CPU that gets stuck to your cooler like this, it can be really hard to just pull the CPU right off. So what I recommend doing is actually twisting the CPU, and it should pop right off like that. And because of how loose that cooler was and how easy the CPU came off with it, I'm pretty sure that was the issue, so let's go ahead and get this CPU reinstalled. And you know how I was talking about the lack of an outer retention mechanism on these PGA motherboards? What I meant by that, there's really nothing on the outside actually holding this CPU down, only this retention mechanism, which actually just slides the socket over ever so slightly to lock the pins in place. And because of the lack of security, just a little bit of force can actually pull these CPUs out. Like exactly what I think happened here. So let's wipe off this old thermal paste. This way we can reinstall the heatsink. And then I don't know if you noticed that the fact that this fan was backwards earlier, but you always want the ugly side of the fan going towards your heatsink. That's the motor side, because on most fans, that's the direction of the airflow. So it'll actually push the air through the heatsink and allow it to be exhaust out the back. And with that CPU and cooler now reinstalled, now when we go to turn the system on, everything fires right up. So it looks like my suspicion was right, and this CPU cooler actually pulled that CPU out, causing the system to not work previously. So with it now back up and working, let's get it back over to our customer.